The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, September 13th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Professor of History at Yale University, Samuel Moyn. On his recent book, Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War. Also on the program today, in the wake of President Biden's mandate announcement, U.S. has fallen to the lowest vaccine rate of the world's wealthiest democracies. Also on the program today, unvaccinated Americans are 11 times more likely to die of COVID, 4.5 times more likely to get infected. FDA warns parents of children under 12 hold off on the vaccine until we find that it's safe for kids under 12. Meanwhile, government funding supposedly runs out in 17 days as the debt limit nears. And on that budget resolution, House Democrats are eyeing a 5.5% corporate tax rise. Bumps for those of you who make over $5 million a year in income. Sorry. And a capital gains increase. Biden supposedly planning a lobbying blitz for filibuster reform and voting reform. New York Times report that drone strike, which killed 10 civilians, 7 of whom were children, may have been launched on an aid worker. California recall is tomorrow. Polling looks good to avoid the governorship of a right-wing reactionary radio host. Lastly, a federal judge ruling looks like it's going to cut deep into Apple's App Store monopoly. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Returning to her perch at the Majority Report after I'm sure what was a tremendously refreshing week off. Emma Figlin. Hello, Emma. I don't know why you rolled your eyes after I said that.
It's like I go into a week off thinking it's going to be tremendously refreshing, and it's just not. Tried to train back from where I was last night. Delays. It was about 2.5 hours or times the length it normally would be. Lots of hiccups and just, I'm here to complain.
That's all right. I feel like during the pandemic, it has been everything's been harder. Mm-hmm. Everything is like just a baseline of 15% to 20% more aggravating or difficult, and it goes up depending on it gets exponential when you have kids, when you have sort of work, complications, and
when you're a New York Giants fan, right? Those things.
Or when you're a Giants fan, I guess, yeah.
Those things heighten, I don't normally sit in the dark after my sports teams lose. It's just the pandemic.
Well, I don't know about whether that's true or not, but my guess is it's not.
It's not.
Meanwhile, the Senate is back, I believe, today. The House is coming back shortly. I mean, the House has been working. You have the committees have been working on developing the $3.5 trillion, at least as far as we know, $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. There is and Joe Manchin, as we announced last week, had claimed, I just can't see us doing a $3.5 trillion bill. Maybe a $1 trillion, maybe a $1.5 trillion bill. And ostensibly, the reason why he says this is because that seems to be about it. Then there's like a mumbling about inflation, and that's about it. And so he, sort of basking in the attention, hit the Sunday morning talk shows yesterday. Here he is. Here is Joe Manchin on CNN yesterday. CNN State of the Union with Dana Bash trying to get a sense from Joe Manchin. Okay, what is it like? What's
your reasoning?
Right, exactly. 1.5. Yeah. Well, and frankly, there's a question I wish she would have asked after this, but she didn't. But here it is. Here is Joe Manchin with his very obvious reason for saying that it shouldn't be 3.5 trillion. It should be 1.5 trillion.
I want to ask you about a lot of that, but are you saying it's the price tag, it's the timeline, both?
It's the urgency. Do we have the urgency to do what they're wanting to do in such a quick period of time?
But can you be specific? Okay, let's talk about the dollar sign.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific number in mind?
Here's a number you should be getting to. First of all, I have agreed to get on to the reconciliation because that's the time for us to make financial adjustments and changes. I thought the 2017 tax code and tax law, the way it was changed, was very, very, very unfair, and it was weighted to the wealthy.
So what's the number?
And the bottom line is what the number would be what's going to be competitive in our tax code. I believe that the corporate rate should be at 25, not 21.
But what's the overall number for the budget bill?
I think that you're going to have to look at it and find out what you're able to do through a reasonable, responsible way.
So then how do you know that it's not 3.5?
It's going to be at 1, 1.5. We don't know where it's going to be.
So you think ballpark 1.5?
It's not going to be at 3.5, I can assure you. But with that, whatever it is, once you have a competitive tax code that you can compete globally, and then you should look at what the need is. What's the urgency and the need that we have?
And I want to get to that, but just because this is the thing that people consume. Do you have a ceiling?
My ceiling is this: the need of the American people, and for us to basically take in consideration inflation. No one's concerned about the debt. You know, our debt as of Friday was $28.7.5 trillion. And we're not even talking about that. No one's talking about that.
You just said 1.5. It sounds like 1.5
I'm just saying that basically, well, I've looked at numbers. If we have a competitive tax code from a non-competitive, it doesn't help the working person that was done in 2017. That's in the 1.5 range, okay? If that's where it is, shouldn't you be looking at what does it take now to meet the urgent needs that we haven't already met?
Okay.
How do you go into that interview and not have an answer to, like, not know that's exactly what you're going to be asked?
And frankly, I would have liked Dana Bash to say, okay, wait a second. So you're saying that there's 3.5 trillion is not made up. I mean, I don't understand really the competitive tax code stuff when he's talking about individual taxes, unless he feels that people making more than $400,000 who get taxed are going to move out of the country. I don't exactly understand what he's even saying there. But then he's saying, which I think is a rational thing, like, I want to make sure that we have an urgent need for those things that are in the bill and that they're actually needs of the American public. That's not an unreasonable thing to say. And the argument with the people who said $6 trillion was that we had $6 trillion worth of needs for the American public that were urgent. Things like climate change, things about infrastructure, things about helping people who don't have health insurance and need an expansive health insurance. And he's arguing, and then it got pushed down to 3.5 trillion. He's saying, no way, 3.5 trillion, 1 to 1.5 trillion. Now, look, we sit here with 3.5 trillion. I can't tell you exactly like why it should be 3.5 trillion as opposed to 4 trillion, right? These are just numbers. I can't even contemplate, like, I can't say I think we do need to expand Medicaid care, and we need to drop the, who's eligible for it. And I can go on and talk about these things that we need. Dana Bash should have asked him, what in the $3.5 trillion package do you think is not urgent or is not a need for the American public? You've just wiped out over 2/3 of it, of the bill. What are those things? Can you name me 3 things in there, 3 big ticket items that you think just simply the American public does not need at this point? That's the question that's got to be asked to him, because it all just gets thrown around with these sort of abstract numbers and it means nothing to anybody. And he's able to go just like, well, you say 3, I say 1, maybe we meet 2. Well, but then he's justifying this position based upon what ostensibly is very tangible and concrete things. American public doesn't need that. Well, what is that? Tell us exactly what it is that you would cut out of this bill.
Well, she's trying to pin him down for a specific number so that she can go back and hold him to that, I guess. And she doesn't have a specific
because they don't even care what the...
Right, but she doesn't care. She's not going to make a value judgment about what is needed in the reconciliation package in infrastructure. So that's why she can't ask that line of question. It's just like not in her nature. Another thing she could have asked, though, too, is why did you support $4 trillion earlier this year and think that there was an urgent need, which he was on the record saying, and now suddenly it can't be 3.5 trillion, which is beneath your initial statements on this matter. That's another way to talk about how his concept of what is urgent is quite fluid and just basically is below what the Biden administration and the Democratic Party consensus want.
I just want to know that when he gets it's going to ultimately, he's going to be able to lower the amount of the package. By how much, we don't know. But I just wonder what it is that he thinks he's going to be able to go back to West Virginia and go like, I killed the blankety blank initiative.
I'd imagine it's the climate provisions.
Very possibly, but those provisions are basically going to pay for coal miners to find other work. But we shall see. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Samuel Moyn, professor of history at Yale University, on his most recent book, Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace, Reinvented War. Be right back after this. Folks, a couple of sponsors for our program today. Emma missed it, but I had bad food poisoning last week.
I heard about it this morning.
Oh, yeah. There was, I didn't give too much of the details, but it wasn't good. And the one thing that my doctor had said to me, he said, make sure you stay hydrated. And I was like, I got that. That's the one thing I got covered.
Liquid IV?
Liquid IV. 1 stick of liquid IV, 16 ounces of water, hydrates you faster and more efficiently than water alone. That's basically, liquid IV was basically my diet for 2 days because I couldn't eat anything. I was just like cramping up. I don't want to get too much into this. Liquid IV tastes great. They got flavors like watermelon, strawberry, lemon, lime. Your favorite, acai.
There you go.
Is it the way you say that?
Close enough.
There's a couple other flavors too that I've been really digging.
I like strawberry.
Strawberry, watermelon is a big one. Of course, I like the pina colada as well. I'm not gonna be ashamed of that. Liquid IV contains 5 essential vitamins, more vitamin C than an orange, and as much potassium as a banana. It's healthier than those sugary sports drinks. There are no artificial flavors. There's no artificial preservatives, and less sugar than an apple. Liquid IV is powered by cellular transport technology. An optimal ratio of glucose, sodium, potassium delivers water and nutrients into the bloodstream. The company has donated over 4 million servings in response to COVID-19. Products are being donated to hospitals, first responders, food banks, and more. Back in the days when I would travel, and hopefully again soon, I would take it for airline flights so I wouldn't dehydrate. When I feel cold coming on, I use the tangerine immunity support. When I need a little energy boost, which is very often, and giving up the coffee, I go for the matcha. That is a lemons, I think ginger technically, but it's for me, it's the matcha. They have passion fruit and guava. There's all sorts of flavors, and it's super easy. I could put a couple of packets in my bag, and bingo, bango, I'm set. You can grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code MajorityRep. That's code MajorityRep at checkout. Not Majority Report, MajorityRep. Just R-E-P. That's 25% off anything when you get better hydration today using the promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Oh, and this is a great tool. I don't care what you do, whether you're writing for business or you just got to write emails to people or whatever it is. And I've been like pounding on Mila about this because she's now a junior. And I'm like, dude, there's two things that you need to know how to do better than anything else, reading and writing. And you're not going to, the more you read, the better your writing becomes. But this is also a great tool to help develop, to both fix your writing in real time, but I also think it's a great tool to develop your writing skills. You want to write faster and better? Well, writing faster and better means you have better business, you have better relationships, people you work with or colleagues. And this is why your team needs Wordtune for Teams. Wordtune, God bless you, is the only AI-powered writing tool that understands meaning, offering writing suggestions that help anyone achieve clear and compelling writing. It is the ultimate writing tool to elevate your team's writing instantly. This is the thing. When I approached this, I tried out this Wordtune, and I thought, like, oh, I've done like grammar stuff like this, and it's not that. It actually is a tool that enhances your style of writing. And it's pretty amazing where artificial intelligence is at this point. It really has the ability to tease out what you're trying to say and have you say it in a clearer fashion. And it's just very helpful to see that type of correction. When can your team use Wordtune? Well, Wordtune improves performance on any project, everything from internal emails to press releases, sales outreach to customer service support, and so much more. You can use Wordtune anywhere you're writing online, including Google Docs, Slack, Outlook, Web, WhatsApp, whatever. You can try Wordtune for free at wordtune.com/majority. Check it out, folks. Are you looking to elevate your entire team's writing? Well, my listeners can get a discount for their team today at wordtune.com/majority. Wordtune improves writing efficiency up to 4 times. Better, faster writing means better business. Start writing with Wordtune at wordtune.com/majority. And lastly, I've talked about Honey many times before. We all shop online, even more so than we probably did 2 years ago. Folks also know that I don't like to spend a lot of money when I don't need to. My children have also learned this for a long time. When Mila started buying stuff online, I sat her down, I gave her the talk, which is you always search for promo codes before you buy anything. Now, fortunately for her, for Saul, when he comes of age, I won't have to give him that talk because we just put Honey in our browser. So manually searching for coupon codes, it's a thing of the past. Honey is a free browser extension. It scours the internet for promo codes. It applies the best one, finds it, and adds it to your cart. It supports over 30,000 stores online, ranging from sites that have tech and gaming products, popular fashion brands, even food delivery. So basically what happens is this. You're at your favorite site. Let's say in my instance, I'm buying a shirt. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm thinking of a particular site, but I don't know if they want me to mention that site. But I'm going in, I'm buying a shirt. You're about to check out. Honey pops down from your, just out of your browser, says, hold on, searching for coupons. Sometimes they land one, sometimes they don't. But the best part is, either way, you've got that peace of mind. Hey, I saved $5. Or hey, at least I didn't pass up the opportunity to save $5. Mm-hmm. And it happens almost instantaneously. It has found over 17 million members, over $2 billion in savings. If you use Amazon, it'll tell you like, hey, wait a second, there's a price drop, or there's been a price drop, or the price is up, and that's interesting. But I have saved money recently, like I say, on a shirt. There was something I bought for the office recently. I saved a couple of bucks on. And Mila saves money on her makeup. If you don't already have Honey, you could be straight up missing out on free savings. It's literally free, installed in a few seconds. And by getting it, you're doing yourself a solid and supporting this podcast. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/majority. That's joinhoney.com/majority. Okay, I want to welcome to the program Samuel Moyn. He is a professor of history at Yale University. His most recent book, Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War. Samuel, welcome to the program. I'm joined by Emma Vigland.
Thanks for having me.
So you start, in many respects, I mean, things start really moving after World War II. But let's just go back to where you start. You actually start with Leo Tolstoy, who makes a distinction about the way ones can wage war. And so this must have been in the air in the 1800s, this sort of notion that we can, I don't know, tame war. What was behind that? Talk about that sort of like idea at that time and why it was at that time.
So I start in the mid-19th century because that's when the Swiss come up with the bright idea of making war more humane. And they're responsible for the first Geneva Convention, the first of the Geneva Conventions we still have on the books today. And Tolstoy basically worried that, what if you make war so humane that you tolerate it? And I don't think he was right to ask that question at the time. But he's right now because we've since Vietnam ended up making American war so much more humane than it was before that our presidents tell us it's okay to keep fighting endlessly because it is humane now.
What do we mean when we say humane, and has that term changed from the time that the Geneva Conventions were contemplated?
Sure. So back in the 19th century, the first Geneva Convention was just about the wounded on the battlefield and letting, the Swiss and others take care of them when they were bleeding out. Since then, there are all kinds of other rules, especially involving POWs. But the ones I focus on are these new ones that come in the 1970s that say you can't shoot at a civilian. And if you shoot near a civilian, you can't kill too many civilians collaterally. And those are pretty novel, and they're ones that the United States tries to follow, or at least says it's following, in drone warfare and sending out special forces to 3/4 of the countries where they were last year. So at the beginning, back in the 19th century, there were no rules saying you couldn't go to war. And so I think it was noble for the Swiss to say, let's at least make it kinder and gentler. Now, you and I will say humane war is an oxymoron. You can never have a humane war, but we have to register that these rules, when they're accepted by states like the United States, make war more humane than it was. If we compare the war on terror, not just in terms of Americans dying, but in terms of other victims, to Vietnam or Korea or World War II, it's much more sanitized, and especially the new form of the war on terror with drones and special forces that will continue to fight.
Well, you say sanitized. I think that's the right word for it, right? I mean, what is the distinction between perceived humanity and sanitization? Because I think it can create maybe a false sense that we've progressed. Right.
So it's here that I think, I'm following Tolstoy because he worried about two different groups of people. First, the humanitarians. And he said, think back to slavery, since there were a lot of humanitarians before there were abolitionists who said, let's make it kinder and gentler. And Tolstoy said, that's not good enough. Maybe it was even a mistake if it entrenched slavery, which some historians actually think it did. Mm-hmm. So the one question is about humanitarians to think about the risk that you're entrenching war and struggling to make it nicer. And then there's us. Tolstoy compared the audience to people who demand that their meat be slaughtered humanely, but keep on eating it. And the worry there is what we would call bad faith. We think we're good people because we're the kind of people who fight wars humanely. And Barack Obama invited us to think of ourselves that way. In his main speeches on the war, the Nobel Peace Prize address, and his speech 4 years later around drone warfare and targeted killings, he says, I have to fight war eternally. We're America, and the terrorists are always present. However, I am promising to do it in ways that should morally satisfy you. And a lot of people accepted it, and that's why we're still at war today.
I want to definitely, obviously, come back to that. But what was the impetus for Geneva for Switzerland to do this? And because I want to sort of track that through the ages, right? Because I mean, should we take this at face value, right? And I think it seems to me at different points in history, as different sort of people deploy the desire for humane war, it's deployed for different reasons.
Of course. So I think in the beginning, you have some Swiss gentlemen who are engaging in philanthropy, noblesse oblige. They're well off and wealthy, and they're looking to burnish their own moral credentials. You have to note that this is also a fight about how to interpret Christianity at the time. Do we turn the other cheek, as Tolstoy said Jesus insisted, or do we think that making a modest difference through good works will save our souls? Today, I think humane war plays a lot of different roles. I think it's an essential thing for people to pursue. I'm not against it. What I'm worried about is when it has this nefarious consequence of legitimating war, and politicians know it does. Now, it can also play the role of just rationalization. We say it's humane and it's not. How can war ever be humane? But the truth is the military, since Vietnam, has tried to take these roles seriously, and it's affected the fighting. And politicians have imposed rules on things like drone warfare. So it's not pure rationalization. It's somehow something that changes war while also creating more legitimacy for this new kind of war.
Maybe I'm skeptical or cynical, but I can't help but think that some of those Swiss who developed this idea was also like, this is a great way for us to maintain neutrality and not get on the wrong side of anybody in a war, right? Like if we sort of preemptively say it's our thing to be neutral, we're not blamed. Yeah. We're not going to get invaded. We're also not going to have to raise a military. And I can't help but think that it's been cynically deployed ever since.
I think there's a bit of cynicism in everything, and you're right that there's the Swiss governmental neutrality, and these are private citizens setting up the Red Cross as initially a kind of Swiss brand, and these two things did fit together. I think you're making a very savvy point. However, the cause of humane war went global. Actually, the Swiss almost lost custodianship over the laws of war at the end of World War II, just because they'd just done such a horrendous job. But they clawed it back, and they're still in charge of it. But, I would say we have to have a bigger explanation, because this thing has buy-in from so many people. Think about how much we talked about the Geneva Conventions as Americans in response to George W. Bush's shredding of their obligations, and think about how much we've been concerned about the civilian and collateral damage under the drones, not so much challenging their practice, and that's why they keep dropping bombs. So I'm with you that there's tons of cynicism, And what interests me is that this is something that presents as morally uplifting. And I want to say, even if it is, what's the dark side? How is it perpetuating, or at least risking that perpetuation along with it?
Let's talk about what, and really, I think you make the point that World War II is sort of the pivot point for a couple of concepts in terms of this, around things like, the right to go to war, and so what was the sort of, I guess, the canon prior to World War II, and then how did it change after World War II?
So, for 50 years prior to World War II, you've got a lot of transatlantic war, not least the two world wars. And the pivotal thing about World War II is through it, America says, we'll guarantee the transatlantic peace. Now, the price is heavy because Americans have been, engaged in brutal war, for centuries by that point, notably on our own continent, even overseas in the Philippines, lots of Latin American interventions. But because of this World War II decision and the coming of the Cold War, Americans become committed to global war, brutal global war for decades, indeed through our time. The difference, I think, is that the initial forms of that, especially in Asia, Japan with firebombing and nuking, Korea, I think the most brutal war of the 20th century on both sides, and then Vietnam, is one form of American war. But then something happens after Vietnam to bring about this new form. And if you want, we can talk about what were the factors, but it really did matter that America pivoted to be global hegemon in the first place. The question is, how did it move within that from the brutal period to the more humane period? Because it wasn't in World War II, and it wasn't for decades after.
Right. And just to be clear, obviously, I think people are aware that the U.S. sort of took that position of the hegemon following World War II, and so we go through two wars before we get to this sort of new iteration of what a humane war could be. Well, I'm just curious. I just want to because when I think about the bombing of Dresden, or when I think about the dropping of the atomic weapons, and then of course in the Korean War, I don't even think, do we even call it a war? But 3.5 million Koreans died. And what was there just no? It was just like we're just on the Geneva Conventions, those parameters of we can, just about anything goes at this point, except for, the very marginal stuff.
Yeah. So, through that period, there kind of were three reasons why there wasn't much to write home about with the laws of war, and why Tolstoy's concerns were, let's say, premature. First, the law of war, aside from that first Geneva Convention in the 1860s, wasn't that humane. It was really about letting states do grievous damage. Then there was the fact that the laws of war were really for, let's call it, white on white war. And yet most of the global violence was perpetrated by American and European armies out in the so-called periphery against non-white peoples who were largely excluded from coverage. And then even when there was a bit of humane content, like for POWs, after a while, it was basically ignored. Great example being Adolf Hitler's execution of millions of Soviet soldiers, POWs, in World War II. Doesn't mean it was never followed, but it just wasn't that impressive. And so what had to happen first in these 1949 Geneva Conventions, which are still kind of the ones still on the books, and then mainly in the 1970s when there was an update, you get finally more humane content, especially you can't shoot at civilians and you can't kill too many collaterally. It's a decolonized world in which, the peoples who've been suffering the brunt of global violence for centuries want to lessen it. And then the Europeans aren't fighting that violence anymore and can, like the Swiss have for decades, pose as moralists. Finally, Americans are shamed after Vietnam. And even the military accepts that you can't do that again. And so it's like a perfect convergence of a lot of factors that lead to a big pivot.
Okay, so let's talk about the factors behind that pivot. What drives that? I mean, at one point, there becomes also. I mean, I guess this maybe happens after World War II, but the U.S. is not fighting for peace, but it's fighting for ostensibly for freedom, I guess, and we don't get that conduct of war until essentially the other side of Vietnam, where, you know, we have an idea of like, hey, we have a bunch of war criminals. Like, I mean, right. Even have the concept of war criminals, or at least U.S. people, U.S. servicemen being capable of war crimes until then?
So hard to say. I mean, at the Nuremberg trials, our Supreme Court justice, who's leading our legal team, Robert Jackton, says we can't give the Nazis a poison chalice and not pretend that, you know, these are universal standards. But the truth is that, you know, Americans have never been tried for any alleged crimes they've committed. In Vietnam, actually, there were a lot of proposals to try to rerun Nuremberg. First from like philosophers and intellectuals like Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre, and then from a very famous ex-Nuremberg prosecutor teaching at Columbia Law named Telford Taylor, who wrote a bestseller called Nuremberg in Vietnam. All those folks, though, remembered that Nuremberg had mainly indicted the Nazis for starting illegal wars. And after My Lai, we began to drop that concern. And we began to say, okay, America may need to continue to fight wars and go to war, and it may be very controversial when it does so. But what if it could fight more humanely and not commit the kind of war crimes that My Lai involved? And as I mentioned, for some in the military, and especially the lawyers, it was really important to get involved in the laws of war and use them to provide more legitimacy for American fighting. They were ashamed of what had happened, and they understood that the American military became unpopular. And so they thought the laws of war, which were newly humane in content, could be essential to like the moral credibility of the American military. So that mattered a huge amount.
We should say a lot of young people who watch the show that My Lai massacre, you know, basically was the killing of up to, I think, 500 Vietnamese villagers, largely women and children. And that's only the most, I think, well known.
That's right.
I mean, there's a reason to believe that was not, that was sort of, there was many other massacres like that, I guess I should say.
Absolutely. Lots of debate about that, but I know we can say that even if it wasn't absolutely characteristic, it also wasn't a one-off. And yet this is the thing that I think we should think about when we raise an episode like that. First, it's true that people cared about it, unlike atrocities like No Gun Ri during, you know, Korea. People celebrated the incineration of Japanese civilians and did for decades. What happened after Abu Ghraib? You know, very similar set of revelations. The same reporter was involved, not just in My Lai, but in the Abu Ghraib revelations, namely Seymour Hersh. But a big difference in the aftermath. With a pre-existing anti-war movement, My Lai was fuel on the fire and played a role in making the war illegitimate. What happened after Abu Ghraib? It led to the removal of torture and other detainee abuse from the equation, like debugging the program of endless war, which continues. So I want to remember the My Lai events, but in a sense, observe how different they were, because the concern about atrocity was part of a larger concern about fighting war. And of course, we've lost it.
The one through line is Colin Powell involved in hiding both events, pretty much, right? Colin Powell was involved in the My Lai massacre, is my recollection.
Colin Powell was definitely kind of someone who wanted to learn a lot from the whole Vietnam experience in a lot of ways. And I think he's kind of a tragic figure, not, only because he, I think, has acknowledged that he was made a tool in telling the United Nations that Saddam Hussein had WMD, but I'm thinking of two other things. First, he came up with something called the Powell Doctrine before 9/11, which was supposed to keep the military from engaging in wars it couldn't win and quagmires from which it couldn't escape. But what happened? Right. That's exactly what happened. But he also was part of the officer corps that wanted to make sure that the military was high-minded. And he says things as a result of the Gulf War, where you have military lawyers picking targets. Never go to war without your lawyers. Total novelty in American history. And so the part of Powell's agenda that survives is not the concern about quagmire. It's the concern to keep American war moral in its fighting through its compliance with these laws. And that's where we are.
That there's quotes around that word moral when you say that. I just want to make that clear. And also, I want to sort of just make that distinction that you were making between My Lai and torture. I want to make that really sort of clear. So in the instance of My Lai, it is a pathogen, if you want, or it is that taints the entire war. Whereas in terms of Abu Ghraib, you're saying it's a pathogen that needs to be removed so that the war remains untainted, right? I mean, that, yeah. and in fact, that's what happened. And that's the distinction that that really we cross that divide as we go into the 70s. We are looking and we are looking as a way to sort of like make our wars a little bit more pure in some way without the sort of tainty things that make it seem bad.
I think that's right. And again, there's enormous political pressure, especially among liberals, to do so, because they've had a peace candidate, George McGovern, but he crashed. And sadly, I think the Democrats take from this harrowing experience the lesson that you can't be anti-war. And indeed, many of them claim to find progressive uses for American force through the world. So we get the rise of humanitarian intervention on the left and democracy promotion on the neocon right, which are both about licensing force in a big way after the end of the Cold War. I want to come back, though, because I want to make sure that, like, to me, this is something that seems moral to those who deploy it. And I would even say that those who stigmatize Abu Ghraib were doing the right thing. And I think they may have thought that they were actually going to delegitimize the war on terror, just as the commotion around My Lai had delegitimized Vietnam, but it didn't happen. And so what I want to say is there's this enormous risk that if you either just focus on the conduct of war, or you try to delegitimize the war by focusing on the conduct, you may end up entrenching what you hate and leave war on a kind of more stable foundation than you found it.
So why did that happen? I mean, if your thesis is correct, that in some ways by focusing on the torture as something like this is what we said at the time, like, this is not the America I know, or whatever. And it's like saying, but the America I know also does wage war. In fact, I think you made the point that, like, from after World War II, we had something like 300 interventions, military interventions, and 80% of those happened after 89, I think it was.
Right.
And so it's like the torture. That's not the America that's not the America that we all believe in. The America we all believe in, though, does go to war. And
right.
so, but what is that? You say, like, that's what happened. Like, what is that passive force? Or was that a passive force?
Well, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, explain to us.
I think because there's an actor and his name is Barack Obama, and he's totally with your description, because he didn't bring the torturers to justice, but he did acknowledge that something went wrong, and he constantly said torture is not us, but the implication is that endless war is us, if it could be made torture free. Now, how that happened, I think, requires us to look with a critical eye at this crucial period after spring 2004 and the Abu Ghraib revelations. I think it made sense for many of us to say, look, you can't spit in the wind of the war on terror. You can't oppose it. All you can do is oppose the evils in it and maybe undermine it for a future in which it can be closed down. But here's the problem. Obama capitalizes on that activism. And when he comes onto office, the first day he shreds the torture memos, even though torture hasn't been practiced for years by that point. And he promises to fight the war humanely in these two major speeches I mentioned. So it's kind of giving him a gift, and he opened it. And, if it's a Pandora's box that we're living with, that's another matter. But, the fact is he's the one who did have an opportunity to take a much more hostile stance towards the war on terror. He had a lot of other opportunities with regard to the economy as well, we know, and he didn't take them. And instead, he became a figure of continuity, not of change you can believe in.
And we should say, you quoted Colin Powell, bring the lawyers. That's exactly what Obama did. He codified all of these things. I mean, Charlie Savage wrote a great book about this. He took what was sort of outside the bounds of our legal system, figured a way to write to get legal opinions and fit it within a legal system. And then it almost like once it becomes legal, right, it almost becomes a euphemism for, or a vernacular for, humane, because it's not illegal. I mean, so we are doing it according to the rules, and this all gets, and it's that, it seems to me, and it's also his failure to hold people to account from the other administration, whether it was a context of sort of a impeachment or to have trials, and then also Haspel and Brennan and all these people. It wasn't just a matter of like, I'm not even going to hold you to account. It's like, it's not going to really interfere with your trajectory of your career.
Right. So he retained the essentials of the war on terror, as it had already, in a sense, been stabilized in the later Bush years. He didn't need to call a lawyer. He was one, but he definitely took steps that Bush never did to formalize kind of endless war. What I would say is because there was no anti-war movement, or he actually, to the extent there was, he took the air out of that balloon. In the early years, people really did think he was a peace candidate, witness the Nobel Prize. He didn't have to face pushback when he took American force illegally to new places, or went beyond the mandates of the United Nations resolution in the case of the destruction of Libya. But he was intensely concerned with getting his lawyers to present, the way Americans are going to fight this war as in conformity with standards, or even go beyond the standards that require you to fight humanely. So I mentioned that the 1970s rule, which is still on the books, is that you can't strike in war if you think that the collateral damage will outweigh the advantage you gain. Obama went way further and said in a drone strike or other targeted killing, if there's any risk of collateral damage at all, we won't strike. Now, it's not that that rule was followed, because it wasn't. Too many died for it to be followed. But the fact that he said he was going to follow this rule is really revealing, because he understood that he was going to play on the humanity in order to extend and expand the war. And so I think the law and the law of humane war has a really important place in the outcome. And that's why I wrote the book.
How much does technology also sort of add to this? Because technology and I guess sort of the development, some of the lessons that were learned from Vietnam. So I'm thinking about Bush not allowing any photographs of any returning military personnel who have been killed. The embedding of reporters in Iraq, so it made it almost like impossible for reporters to get independent stories or other perspectives other than with U.S. military personnel. I mean, I did this during the Iraq War, and it was amazing to walk around in the mid 2000s, and nobody seemed to sort of even acknowledge the fact that we were at war. I mean, after 2006 and the Democrats come in to Congress, nobody just wasn't, whatever, not aware of millions of internal refugees or hundreds of thousands of people we're killing. It's just going on, and it's like it's over there. Just so happens that one of the players is the United States, but it's not really any of our business. I mean, that to me seems like sort of, I guess, the 1-2, I'm not sure which part of that, of the humane thing, right? Like the humane part is the jab, and the sort of complete submersion of awareness of the thing going on is the hook, I guess.
I think that's right. And I think it, goes back to Tolstoy's analogy with humane slaughter of non-human animals. We have laws that require them to be slaughtered humanely, but we also have that killing far away and out of sight, even so. So these two things, distance and humanity, work together to kind of salve the conscience or keep sight out of mind for so many people. There's also a technological component to the kind of rise of this light or no footprint war with teched up special forces or armed drones or standoff missiles, as opposed to like inevitably violent, close hands, big, heavy footprint, lots of troops, invasions and occupations. And there, my reflection is that we seek the technology that we morally want. We're not looking for napalm anymore, even though that served Americans, for various ends, precisely because it was brutal. Now we are commissioning from, Raytheon et al. Drones, which serve not just a strategic end, but also this kind of end of securing the moral acceptability for enough people of the continuous engagements.
This was also the sort of the vision that I guess like a guy like Rumsfeld had too of the military, right? We're just gonna
absolutely
like JSOC. We're gonna have such a light footprint with, and guys in I don't know, Chevy Chase, Maryland are going to be fighting our war in Pakistan. With just a remote controlled drone.
Yeah, and now drones are old fashioned, and we're on the verge of autonomous weapon systems, which don't require men with joysticks or pilots somewhere else. Absolutely, the revolution in military affairs, so called, had to be put aside for the invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq that Don Rumsfeld actually, went to his grave, having sponsored. That's kind of, I think, the most famous thing that he's done. However, it was really due to the crisis of both of those invasions and occupations that, in a way, the new light or no footprint form of war that Rumsfeld had always advocated kind of was born. And I think the humanity affected that latter form of war, especially because Obama applied these rules to theaters that weren't Afghanistan and Iraq, or later ISIS, but places where he just wanted to, send a drone or special forces. And that became like an alarmingly big area, a long list of places. And it even got worse under Trump, although Trump retained the essentials of Obama's humane rules in whatever his personal preferences.
He loosened some of the those rules
on transparency, but this crucial rule that you can't strike if you think anyone will die collaterally, he kept amazingly.
But didn't he loosen that? I thought my understanding is he loosened that in the context of, I think, of Afghanistan.
So it didn't apply in Afghanistan to begin with. It only applied in so-called areas outside active hostilities. And so we're talking about, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, sub-Saharan Africa generally, where there's a huge drone infrastructure built under Obama.
So what happens when we do get those autonomous weapons? Like when it's not even like, that's super humane, right? Like, humans aren't even doing this. It's just a robot that we happen to program and deploy. And that's just like, it's like it's almost like a stoplight. It's just, it's really stopping. Like how do we break through to the discussion about the legitimacy of war, period, rather than the legitimacy of the way that we're waging war?
Right.
When we are faced with this type of automation of everything?
I think that's the current dilemma, and we're seeing both possibilities in this domain. So, the lawyers are already haggling about what it would take to make these machines humane. And again, can you imagine them being like police forces, in the sense that, someday, with the right algorithms, they will have to ask if you want to surrender first before they shoot, or do they capture in preference to killing out wherever. But then there's something else that's promising, which is this, Stop the Killer Robots campaign. And actually that's been sponsored by one of those human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, that for decades basically said, we don't pronounce on whether wars are good or bad. We just say whether you're fighting them humanely or inhumanely. Well, if you take a weapon, a particular kind of weapon, in this case, a slaughter bot, and say we condemn it, well, I think that's coming close to condemning the wars of the future. And to me, it's a really promising thing that there's new activism that's not just about humanity, but about whether we can accept this extraordinarily disturbing form of war that's, coming down the pike, even if the programming is good.
How is the critique of war, and I guess particularly from the United States, as waged by the United States, and the critique of imperialism, is that distinct? Or is it essentially at this point like people's either awareness of the issue of imperialism is like sliding into their awareness of war, or is it coming from the other direction?
I think it depends on how you define your term. So, whatever kind of empire America is, it's one that is not like the old empires that engaged in conquest. It does definitely engage in war. And to me, the disturbing novelty about American empire is that it's taking its wars and making them more like policing, already making them humane even before you get the good programmed autonomous weapons systems, and saying it would be nice if we could follow these humane rules. And, so to me, we're seeing something that is a new form of war and therefore a new form of empire. But there are, of course, other forms of empire, notably like in economic relations. However, I would just, stress that the evolution my book is trying to highlight in the way we've fought war and said war can become moral is like a new face of empire that old empires didn't present, because brutality was fine. Now it's less and less so, but it doesn't mean that empire is over. Indeed, it could become more insidious if it's humane but eternal.
Samuel Moyn, the book is Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, quick break, and then we will be back to wrap things up for our Peacock viewers. Just a reminder, folks, if you're in California, tomorrow is the last opportunity, right? Is it tomorrow? I thought it was the 13th, but today's the 13th, but should be on a Tuesday. So tomorrow is your final opportunity to vote in the recall of Gavin Newsom. I'm not necessarily a huge Gavin Newsom fan, to be honest with you, but if you vote to recall him, then it's an open, essentially, race to who could become your next governor. I still remember the last recall, and Gary Coleman would have been an upgrade on the Schwarzenegger that ended up winning. But here is Steve Doocy on Fox and Friends, and Brian Kilmeade and Rachel Campos Duffy, with the guy who's most likely to win in the event that the recall passes. So you're going to want to vote a no on the recall.
That's the number one thing you've got to do.
Here is Larry Elder on Fox and Friends.
In California, the degradation of that state under his leadership is really quite apparent. You know, Larry, I'm really curious about, I know you've been working hard, and it looks like, you know, the fact that they're bringing in these big names, they are threatened by you and your candidacy. I'm worried about fraud. You know, when they found that meth addict with 300 ballots in his the trunk of his car, are you hearing any other stories like that? And how worried are you that that might be part of this election?
I am worried about fraud, and we have a...
Yeah, the meth addict who's got 300 ballots. Now, of course, the meth addict with the 300 ballots didn't actually vote that many times, and I don't even know if the ballots were actually legit.
How do you know that? Could have been working on behalf of Newsom.
But it really is amazing. It's almost as if like the only reason why they want this the elections now are to claim fraud.
Fraud, yeah.
There it is.
Well, that's going to happen more and more frequently.
And of course, why waste all those trips by those Democratic luminaries when you got this thing in the bag because of the fraud, all the meth addicts you got going around with all their ballots? It seems like a little redundant.
Shouldn't be worried if they've already had this handled.
Folks, if you're watching us on Peacock, we say goodbye and see you tomorrow. Goodbye and see you tomorrow. For those of you who are still here, hello and see you today. We got a lot of stuff planned for the fun half today. Of course, it's Monday, which means that Emma's down in the dumps because the Giants didn't win. And
well, I mean, this is
whole show's trajectory now is going to be a function of Emma's.
It's like my uncle after a Vikings game.
Malaise.
Well, I feel for him with the Vikings. This is supposed to be their year because they have one down year in the even number years, and then the odd number years they're back and good again, but not good enough to actually make any noise. Sad though, they lost to the Bengals in overtime. But I will say, I'm almost just I'm not used to it by now, but the Giants haven't won the playoff game since the Super Bowl 10 years ago. Did you know that?
I don't remember that Super Bowl.
I do like that they brought the old Giants helmets back as opposed to the throwback NY ones, because now these new Giants ones are like throwback too. And
they didn't.
I like them.
But like they'll do it for Thursday, because I think it's the Thursday night. Yeah, it sucks. Like, I mean, it's just that this year I actually have expectations, so I was more sad than normal. You know, like Daniel Jones' rookie year, you just want him to look competent. It's his third year. Still shaky on that front. So.
Hey, Emma, look on the bright side. You're not a Jets fan.
Yep. There's always that, Bradley.
Like me.
There's always that.
Well, folks, there it is. I hope that was you get a little taste of that. And but we've got we're going to talk more about Joe Manchin, and we got George W. Bush trying to, and Rudy Giuliani. There are 9/11, things.
You don't want to talk about how I hit on some bets yesterday, though?
No, I don't. I really don't.
Steelers plus 6.5. Cardinals.
Oh my God. All right, folks. Just a reminder, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityReport.com. When you do, you not only help this show thrive and survive, you also get extra content. So become a member today. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. It is our members that keep this show going. Don't forget, you can also sign up for our AM Quickie newsletter. Head over to majority.fm. Scroll down to the bottom of the page. Just put your email in. We'll never sell it to anybody. But we will send you some headline news every morning. And people are loving it. So you should check it out. That is the AM Quickie. Also, don't forget we have our Discord, majoritydiscord.com. Matt, what is happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
This weekend we released for patrons episode I'm really excited about with Charles Keeney. He's the author of The Road to Blair Mountain on the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was the largest labor uprising in this country's history, and also the second time in America where American citizens dropped bombs from planes onto other Americans. This happening 90 days after the Tulsa Massacre. So we talk about this, if you want to access that. We'll probably release it for everybody in a week or two, but patreon.com/leftreckoning to hear that, and how you can find your own local Blair Mountain and use it as a rallying point for activism.
I mean, Second Amendment says it's okay to drop bombs on people, right? I mean, everybody has the right to
bear arms and use them.
Bear arms and use them.
Yeah, well-regulated air militia.
Yeah, why not?
Every time you talk about that, I think of Escape from Witch Mountain, that movie, but that's not.
That's not the same.
Just getting back in the groove, jeez.
Don't forget, check out Nomi's show, youtube.com/The Nomi Key Show. Also on Twitch, twitch.tv/the_Nomi_Key_show. Why'd you look at me like that?
I'm not. I'm waiting for you to wrap things up.
See you in the fun house. 646-257-3920. Go like this. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
It's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back.
We are back. Darn it. I got one of those. I'm pretty sure I got a
spam call.
Yeah.
You didn't want to pick it up in the middle of our interview with Samuel?
I thought probably he wouldn't appreciate it as much as I would. But I know you guys would appreciate it. I mean, if it happens now, I'll do it. They call me back.
Have you checked out that guy who does that every morning on Twitch?
He does it every morning on Twitch?
He trolls spam callers. He has like 2,000 people watching all the time.
How does he get that many people to call him? How does he control it?
I think he might solicit, but that must be how he does it. I'm not sure.
I'm going to get on that. This guy Manchin, it's unbelievable. We played a clip of him on Dana Bash's show, right? The CNN show.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows he's going out and doing everybody's show on Sunday.
Doesn't need to prepare, though. He's got it down.
Somehow he doesn't even need to come up with a rationale for his number, which maybe that's a good sign, because he's like, my rationale is just I want to get on the shows.
It's flexible.
And so I don't really care about anything. So I'm not going to put any effort into it. In fact, the more effort I put into it, the more I'll have to stay on that position. And I don't really want to do that. Now, this is hopeful thinking on my part, but we'll see. Here is West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin on with ABC's George Stephanopoulos.
But if the bill is fully paid for and doesn't add to the deficit, the unknown that you're concerned about, one of them is inflation. That's not really a concern, is it, if the bill is fully paid for?
Well, George, basically, if the bill is fully paid for, why did they put $1.7 trillion of borrowing power in the language? And next of all, it's only run out for 10 years, okay? So if some of the things we know will never go off, so you should be more accurate to what the real number is going to be. I'm just saying right now, George, we're at $28.750 billion, $28,750,000,000, and it goes up $4 to $5 billion every day. No one's even talking. Inflation. People are talking to me in West Virginia about the price of gas, the price of everything they buy, including their groceries, how it's affecting them. So I think we need to see what we're doing right now and the effects we're having. No one is saying they're losing their benefits, because they're going to extend up through next year. Why are we rushing it for this 1 week? Why do we have to have everything done in 1 week?
Okay. Now, I would just explain one thing to you, because if you remember the clip that we played of Dana Bash, she said, I voted for the reconciliation language and the resolution so that we could have this debate. Essentially, what that reconciliation resolution says, among other things, is we're going to have $1.7 trillion worth of borrowing power. They decide on that number, maybe because it's half of 3.5 trillion. I'm not exactly sure why. But if he has a problem with the idea of borrowing $1.7 trillion, why did he vote for the reconciliation bill? That's basically like, this is...
Well, it was in the framework, exactly, right?
It's like all you're doing is voting for the framework. You just said, I voted for the framework. Why'd you vote for the framework that involved borrowing money if that's the case? And then, the idea here is like, he doesn't want it done this quickly. And it's part because their whole strategy is punt, 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 till we're too close to an election and people freak out, or there's something else that helps me. That is that is the oldest play in the book. And frankly, it's also the big mistake as to why I said it was a big mistake at the time. This should have gone through in April. They should have been pushing this through in April, in the wake of passing the $1.5 trillion COVID bailout. But this guy is so full of it. He refuses to accept the idea that, well, what if they did pay for it all? Because, that's not going to happen.
Well, because he doesn't want the corporate tax rate to increase to the degree that the House Democrats are weighing 26.5%. He says, I'm not going over 25%. That's another arbitrary flag
of course
he's put down. But I'm sure that's, he can't say that out loud, but because everyone would be in favor of that pay for, but that's one of the pay fors he objects to.
Yeah, and I don't even care about the pay for, frankly,
I know,
but it's just,
he cares.
If he cares.
Yeah,
exactly. We got to have this paid for. Okay, well, we've got to pay for it. Well, we can't pay for it in that way. It's really, why does it have to be done this week? Give me a break.
It has to be done. It's also not even this week, but it's approaching the end of the fiscal year at the end of the month. They have to do it. They have to address a lot of these things at the very least.
Can't we just punt? Here is Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, who is the chairman of the Budget Committee, pushing through this $3.5 trillion package. Here's Bernie Sanders on CNN with Dana Bash.
Question is, the real differences on the question of your priorities here, but also just the raw map. You mentioned Republicans not being on board. I don't need to tell you this is a 50-50 Senate. If Senator Manchin or even Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona doesn't support this, you will not get the votes. How do you get there? Look, are you willing to compromise on any of this? Additionally, I know you did. Additionally.
No. Look, don't make this a Bernie Sanders versus Joe Manchin issue. It is not.
Yeah, no, and I'm not trying to. I'm trying.
Dana.
As the budget chairman, you have a negotiating position. You and the White House and the leadership. So I don't mean to make it about you. Just how do you, the Democratic leadership in the White House, get to a place where there's something that can be done?
Well, I think I'll tell you how we get it. Because the American people are going to speak out on this issue. Every single poll that I have seen, whether you are a Democrat or a working class Republican or an independent, overwhelming support for this bill. The President of the United States wants it. Now, this is not like a 50-50 split in the Democratic caucus. You may know this. I'm chairman of the Budget Committee. On the Budget Committee are 11 Democrats. 9 of them were prepared to support a $6 trillion bill. I would guess at least 40 Democrats out of 50 understand that we need at least $6 trillion. So there's already been a significant compromise. But the bottom line here is, if you think about the House as well, these two bills, the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill are marching down the path together.
Yeah.
Mr. Manchin, I know, worked very hard on the bipartisan bill. It would be a terrible thing for the American people if both of those bills failed. They are linked together. They're going to go forward together.
Yeah,
and that's the big leverage point, right? That we sometimes forget about. It's going to be like these things are tied together, and this is where the progressives hold their leverage. And I don't think that I do not think that this is a similar dynamic to the COVID relief. You stand in the way of that COVID relief, you're going to get quashed.
Yeah.
This time around, supposedly the president wants both bills. So you're not standing in the way of what the president and the party wants. You are upholding what the president and the party wants, which is both bills. And I don't think there's a lot of people who are going to be walking around being able to blame the progressives if both bills fail. It's going to be those who don't sign on to what the Democratic, leadership has decided on. And so the progressives have more leverage. I think they believe they have more leverage, which is really the point. And so you may end up seeing something like $3.1 or $2.9 trillion. That doesn't seem insane to me, but that would come out that way. But again, we're talking about $500-600 billion worth of spending. That's an enormous amount of spending. And it's like,
and which part is going to get cut out?
What do you get cut? What do you cut?
I have a lot of fears about the climate provisions because of Manchin's vocal opposition to this. I have a lot of fears about that. And Bernie's gonna, I think, probably plant his flag on Medicare, but
well, Medicare expanding the benefits for those at 65 or older, but I think that 60 to 65 is something they're going to attack too. Would be my guess, just because there's such hostility to it by folks like Pelosi.
Well, that's the point. Is you talk about leverage, right? The reason that progressives have some of this is because they have the backing of leadership in this area. Pelosi wants these bills passed. Biden wants these bills passed together. On lowering the Medicare age, you don't got that backing, and so that can go quickly as far as Biden, Pelosi, Schumer are concerned.
There's a lot of people on sort of the moderate or sort of centrist media that are derisive of the idea that progressives have any leverage at all now. I was listening to Minnesota's sort of left, right, and center version in Minnesota, which means that pretty much everyone's on the right, and then there's a centrist there, a liberal centrist. But they just kind of all took the position of oh, well, you just need to pass the bipartisan one because we need to do something. And I mean, I hope that those people are surprised.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, that's what it's going to come down to. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 308. We will turn up the volume. And the... Hello, 30... Oh, wait. He's not there. All right. She's not there. Let's try it again. Calling from a 705 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is me.
Hello, me. What is on your mind?
This is Gabe from Ontario.
Gabe from Ontario. What's on your mind?
Well, I called to talk about Canadian politics. A little bit nervous, pardon me.
It's all good.
So I've heard a number of callers call in and complain about Trudeau quite significantly. I think they're all legitimate complaints. But, as a leftist and a person that, wants to see some policies happen that work for, humanity and Canadians and so on, I just wonder what strategies will actually work.
Okay.
So, picking up on the Sam Seder 5 concentration camps are better than 7 or whatever. I think that it can be easily said that liberal policies are better than conservative policies in Canada. The policy that I'm focused on, the liberal policy, would be the universal child care policy, which I think would be hugely impactful and probably just be enshrined in Canadian government policy, for forever. I think things like this wind up being popular and hard for conservative governments to get rid of. I guess the point is, well, Trudeau is definitely, part of American empire, I would say, or like part of the colonial tradition of
all right, so let me see if I got what you're saying here. The lesser of two evils, as you perceive it, is Trudeau, and you'll maybe get that. You're saying that childcare hangs in the balance, and if
I think so, yeah.
Okay, who would you vote for in that election if you didn't feel it was necessarily a lesser of two evils? If you thought you guys have, a different system than we have here. And so it's a pretty binary choice when we have at least a presidential election. Often, sadly,
it's quite different here. And it's parliamentary system, so you don't vote for prime minister, you vote for your MP, your member of parliament. So I live in a district that's very conservative, so even if I vote liberal strategically, it's really not going to mean anything. So I think I'll wind up voting for Jagmeet because Jagmeet, the leader of the NDP, aligns with my values better than the others. And
what's the polling say?
Pardon me?
What's the polling say, nationally speaking?
Right now, it is neck and neck. The last time I checked, the Conservative had a higher percentage, and the Liberals have a higher projected seat count. So that would wind up with a Liberal minority, where we might get our, child care policy, maybe. The Liberals have broken that promise in the past, which I guess is worth mentioning. But still, I do think that it's worthwhile for leftists to sort of align around policies like this, because I just think it would be tremendously helpful for, struggling families, or not even struggling, middle-class families, I understand child care costs for, a couple kids under 5 can be $2,000 or $3,000 a month.
Yep.
It's hard.
Yep. Well, I appreciate the phone call. Good to have you weigh in. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam.
I guess what I'd be curious to hear about from a Canadian listener is, should you just vote NDP?
Right. Well, in that instant, particularly it seems to me like if you're in a place where the NDP, where nobody but conservatives has a chance to win, but I don't know. I don't know the intricacies.
Lance may have touched on this a bit when we had him on.
Yeah, I think he did. Go back and check that.
Yeah.
Calling from a 519 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sandy from Ontario. How are you guys?
Very convenient, Sandy. Perfect timing. Should folks vote for the NDP?
Yes.
There you go. All right, appreciate the call. Bye.
This isn't what I was originally going to call in for, but the Liberals have been promising national child care since the 90s. They've had plenty of time to implement it. They're not going to. It's plain and simple, they won't. The only way we might get something close is if there's a minority government with the Conservatives in charge and the Liberals want to get more power, so they have to compromise with the NDP, because the NDP is generally what pushes them more left.
And so, like a coalition government, you're saying, between the Liberals and the NDP could bring about the NDP could leverage something like that.
So a coalition government could be useful, but the Liberals have already outright said that they won't join forces with the NDP.
But everybody changes their mind, right?
Yeah,
I mean, don't people change their mind?
He might if you want to stay in power. So right now in the polls, they are neck and neck percentage-wise, the Liberals and the Conservatives. So they're both like at around 31%. But that really means very little given our parliamentary system. So it's possible for the Prime Minister to have 100% control of the votes and everything with only about 33% of the popular vote, because it has to do with seat counts and which riding you're in and how many seats are in the House of each particular party. And as soon as you get the plurality, you win.
I see.
And then once you're in the House, once you get over 50%, you have total control over what bills pass and stuff.
Okay. And
so for a coalition, so for a coalition government, they would have to join forces, and then if they have more seats than the Conservatives in that situation, if the Liberals and New Democrats combined have more seats, then Justin Trudeau could potentially remain Prime Minister, because he would then be declared if they form that coalition. If they do not, then the Conservatives would then be in power. O'Toole, jokes apply, leader of the Conservatives, would then be the Prime Minister, but he wouldn't be able to get anything through unless, one or two of the other parties vote with him.
Fair enough.
And when it comes to economics, the Liberals will always vote with the Conservatives. It's they don't want to tax the wealthy. They don't want to tax corporations. They tend to vote economically. They're in line.
So the election is 7 days out, right? It's a week from today, week from Monday.
Yes, it's on the 20th.
And do they put out, so the percentage doesn't really matter. Do they put out like what the predictions are in terms of seats? Like, is there an opportunity for the Liberals to win or to lose just by enough that they would be forced into a coalition with the NDP?
It is around there, because you go to like 388 polls, I believe, and that will give you a better idea of the seat count, because the 388 or 338 stands for how many seats we have in Parliament. So you need 170 in order to have the majority.
Okay. All right. And is that what you were calling about? Or you calling about something else?
No. I was going to ask how you guys liked the drawing I sent you.
We loved it.
We loved it. You saw it when we opened it on air, correct? And I am now sourcing a frame for it.
I was freaking out when you opened it, because I sent instructions on how to open it, because I was very paranoid. The tracksuit uses a very dark lead, and it's very soft. If you blow on it too hard, it will smudge.
Okay.
I did not blow on it.
So I was very worried that you were going to open it wrong. That's why I sent instructions.
But I opened it right.
You did end up opening it right.
Okay. He was very cautious.
You did end up opening it right.
Yeah.
I was super cautious, but really appreciate it. And like I say,
and I
sitting on,
I appreciate you guys
on my
opening
desk,
it up on air.
Sitting on my desk and getting trying to get like a high-end, frame, one that has, you know what I'm talking about, like anti-acid.
And look, I have this card that you sent too, and it was very sweet, and I took a picture of it and I sent it to my mom, because I knew she'd appreciate the kind words and be proud of me for a sec. So appreciate it, Sandy.
So, Thank you. Much appreciated, Sandy.
It's still wild to me to think that my art's going to be framed. Like, it's just, I only really rediscovered my talent back in December. So just seeing it being opened up on air, seeing people's reactions, that means a lot to me, to be able to see that.
Well, we really appreciate it. So
it was
thanks
beautiful.
so much.
Yeah.
All right.
And if people want, they can go to my YouTube channel, which is Left of the Box, because I could really help. I'm trying to get over 1,000 subscribers. Once I do, I will start attempting to live stream. Not that I know what I'm doing, but I didn't know what I was doing when I started the channel in the first place. So I'll see where it goes. Who knows?
It never stopped me. So Left of the Box. Thanks, Sandy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And it is 338canada.com for those polls, ladies and gentlemen. Check it out. Calling from a 314 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. Appreciate you making time for me on the show. I actually wanted to discuss with you.
Who's this and where are you calling from?
Oh, this is Nicholas. I'm calling from St. Louis.
Nicholas from St. Louis.
Yeah. So I was trying to understand sort of the liberal, or rather, a lot of the liberal progressive mindset on both, like priorities and climate change. So, for instance, did you see the recent International Panel of Climate Change data that came out?
The report that came out like
a few weeks ago, the IPCC report.
I think it was the one I'm referring to was the very comprehensive one that came out a couple months ago, several months ago. I don't remember exactly.
I think it was closer to like a month ago, but yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So they discuss on Chapter 5 and page, I believe, 77 of Food Security. They have data that shows all of the different diets and which ones save the most or prevent the most CO2 from being released. And far and away, vegan diet is up there. And not only that piece of data, but it's a 2006 paper showed that switching to a vegan diet is 50% better for the environment than switching from a standard car to a hybrid car. And I was wondering why a lot of the attitudes of liberals and progressives in general aren't more pushing for individual switches in this regard, if this is one of the easiest and biggest changes that anyone in America can economically do if they're buying whole vegetables, of course. And
I mean,
that's better for you anyway.
I mean, I think the reason why, from my perspective, I don't tend to push that in that way is because I think when you're talking about individual choices, you are pushing against rope. Like, I'm not here either telling people to go buy electric vehicles, right? I mean, you've never heard me say, you know, people should be buying electric vehicles. You have heard me say, you've heard me say, we need the government to deploy more infrastructure to support electric vehicles, for instance. And I am definitely in favor of the government stopping to subsidize things like corn and soybeans as a way of diminishing our factory farming, as a way of reducing the amount of meat that people eat. I also think that we need to deal with, you know, what they call, you know, sort of food deserts, where people don't have access to good produce and to those things. And so, I mean, I wouldn't in any way, obviously, discourage people from adopting a vegetarian or a, you know, vegan lifestyle. I mean, I think, you know, but really, I think the big thing is that from a governmental perspective, we need to have policies that begin to push people away from meat consumption. And
it's kind of a hard sell
but it's just like, as you know, as an individual thing, it's like, it's just not going to work. And then you start getting into sort of like different like class implications of doing it in that way, because it's not as, you know, not everyone has the opportunity to, you know, well, I'm just going to eat, you know, from my CSA or, you know,
absolutely.
So there's a lot of implications there, but I mean, I think, you know, to the extent that we, you know, like I say, I don't tell people to buy an electric car. I think that we need to have governmental policies that push us in that direction, without a doubt. You know, there was a very conscious decision made by our government 50 years ago to make the cost of meat cheaper so that it would sort of drive consumer spending in other areas. And I think that was a mistake. But I also think, like, you know, you need to sort of respond to this thing holistically on some level. But yes, people should. But then in general, I also, like, I'm not hesitant to say, like, people should eat less meat. If you have the opportunity to eat less meat, do it.
I was just gonna add, like, I think, like, of course, if you can't afford it, then, and it's bad, and you're noticing, like, bad health effects, you see a physician and they try and get you on a diet and it's not good for you, then maybe you shouldn't go down that road. But my point is that we need both the government, and this is just my opinion, we also need, if you can afford it and it's available, then like you were saying, we probably should eat less meat. We probably should switch more towards vegetarian, vegan options. So thank you for your time, Sam.
Appreciate the call.
Yeah.
You know who's a big vegan?
Who?
I think he just reveals it very rarely.
Matt?
No. Marcos Militis. Which is also surprising. Like, he doesn't really push it on his site. And he's been that way for, I think, 15 years.
I'm always impressed and, like, admiring of vegans. I haven't gotten there yet, but...
Veganism stuff. I mean, I know vegetarians, but even then, it's like if you all of a sudden have a busier schedule and less disposable income, you start to add different types of meat back into it just because it's easier. Like, it takes a lot of work to sort of dedicate yourself to those diets. That's why I think, like, just principally to answer the cause question, like, the individual stuff is, like Sam said, it's not the most, like, we could try and do a little, 5 minutes every day saying stop eating meat, but I just don't think that'd be effective as trying to get a government action to say subsidize vegan or vegetarian lifestyles.
Right. I feel like for me, the jump between vegetarian to vegan would be harder than going from.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, everybody knows me and my eggs.
I'd be interested in, like, low-income vegans and how they make it work, because it seems, super difficult.
I don't know if that's, like, that large of a category.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. All right. Calling from a 706 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
It is you. Me has called in multiple times today.
Wow.
Okay. This is Jacob from Georgia.
Jacob from Georgia. What's on your mind, Jacob from Georgia?
It's mostly just a getting it off my chest to an extent. I am an aspiring stunt performer. I work in a hospital as a security guard. And right now, COVID is tearing through our community. I recently had a coworker die. And I have another one in the ICU currently, and a family friend on our COVID floor. And I don't know politically where the right goes in the coming years when they're actively encouraging their base to get sick.
Well, all right, let me ask you this, and I'm sorry to hear this, first off. And I can only imagine what it feels like to be in the middle of that all around you. How old are your colleagues and your family friend?
The family friend, I believe, is early 50s. The colleague who died this past weekend was 52, I believe. And the one who's currently in the ICU is late 30s. I also have another coworker who has been out in the past week who is 27.
And all unvaccinated, I assume.
Sadly, yes.
I don't know if, like, I don't know if stories like this are going to really have that much impact, to be honest with you, on the Republicans. I mean, I don't even know, like, if it's going to have that much impact on, like, the people who have caught COVID.
I'll say anecdotally, somebody not in my immediate family, but extended family isn't vaccinated. And I said, I was asking about that family member. I was like, well, they love Trump, right? Trump got the vaccine. Why not? And, he thinks Trump just had to say that. Right. Like that is, that it's working backwards from that. Even like no matter how many you say all 50, all the living presidents had it, all 50 senators or 100 senators had it, all of that. It doesn't seem to move anything. So I share in your despair. But that's like, to protect people. Like, I'm not convinced that if you go to your colleagues that I would be surprised if more than one of them, for instance, even as difficult as this is for them, even after one of your colleagues passed away, if they drew that line between, what happened to them and holding the Republican Party in any way, or even the right-wing talkers or whomever they, were the people who are driving it, who they hold them to account. My guess would be they don't. I just. Yeah, and. I don't know. I'm afraid of that too. I just think that if you're of that mindset, that you can convince yourself at this juncture that COVID's not real enough, or that or the vaccine is not really any type of protection, whatever mental gymnastics are involved in that have limbered up your mentalness to figure out how to suffer through COVID and say, like, somehow this is Joe Biden's fault, or, somehow this is the libs' fault, or maybe it's just nobody's fault. It just happens. Sometimes you get unlucky. Like, no, sort of like, hey, Or even the people that get the or that get sick and say, I should have taken the vaccine. Is there any indication that that's going to change their voting patterns? I don't know that part of it is what the Republican Party has to live down. I think part of the calculation by the administration to impose a mandate was polling seems to be in their favor on this mandate. Broadly speaking, the people who have got vaccinated are looking around and watching this. And I have a feeling it's really like the people who got vaccinated are the ones who are going to hold the Republicans to account for the deaths of these people more than the people who are suffering from not getting vaccinated are. I think it's just sadly the nature of human beings is like, it's bad enough I got COVID. I'm also not going to blame myself for getting COVID, right? Like, just that's, the person who is emotionally and mentally equipped to, and situated to sort of say, like, I'm not getting vaccinated under these circumstances, also has the same equipment to say, like, this was just, sometimes you get unlucky and that's it. I'm unlucky and it has nothing to do with any decisions I made. That's my sad prognosis for that.
Yeah, and that seems to be what I see with my coworkers who throughout the past year watched as our hospital filled up and watched people die, because part of our job is bagging and tagging the deceased and moving them to the morgue. And throughout all that, they still were, I'm not going to get the vaccine. It doesn't matter. And now some of them have died.
Well, listen, man, this sounds like you got to make sure that you're also taking care of your your mental well-being through this, because it sounds just horribly brutal to watch this and experience it, and to also like see just the dissonance between, like, guys, like, you don't see a connection here. It must be very hard on you, and you really got to make sure that you avail yourself of, like, I don't know if the hospital provides you with any type of, mental health services or health services, but you really should take care of yourself in that regard, because it's got to be uniquely stressful to be in that situation.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for taking my call. I hope you guys have a good day.
All right.
And stay safe and stay healthy.
All right. Hang in there, man.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Bye.
Gosh. That just feels brutal.
I have, I've been seeing some of these viral videos of hospital workers just breaking down, and I can't even imagine. Yeah.
Calling from a 201 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Me?
Yes. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Rum from. I'm vacationing, so I'm not in New York right now. But I'm Rum from New York.
Rum, what's on your mind?
Yeah. So I think the big kind of thing I want to mention or talk about is just like lies, specifically like government lies, not like on a conspiratorial level, but I think I don't know. Over the Trump years, I think one thing that I opened my eyes to was that a lot of the basic functions and systems of government, they kind of rot and go sterile under an unqualified executive and their unqualified appointments, right? I mean, I have a friend who works at the EPA, and it was just like a mess, like the past 4 years. But I think one thing that I enjoyed was that I felt like a lot of the news outlets I go to were a little bit more vigilant and following through and making sure like the Trump admin was like, if they say they're doing something, are they actually doing it? And then we've had like a lot of stories over the past 4 years of like their admin just being kind of a mess. But then I found with the Biden admin, I'm not seeing the same kind of vigilance, and they lie, right? They lie like any administration, basically, like particularly this past week where like the news came out about the drone strike, right, where they killed a bunch of innocent Afghani people, and then they came out and said, oh no, it was definitely a target, we hit whoever we were trying to hit or whatever, but no, they just outright lied to us. And it's come out now, allegedly, or I should say, right, and I think it was a New York Times article over the weekend, basically, where they basically killed a bunch of innocent people.
Yeah, it was a New York Times report, actually.
Yeah. And so the one thing that has been kind of irking me these past couple of weeks is specifically that over the past couple of weeks, I was visiting my partner's family, and he has a sibling who is a federal worker. And this sibling, until this past week, he just got vaccinated, but had been very anti-vax, right? He's a federal worker. He works out of an office in Ohio. And I had asked when I saw him, because back in the summer, Biden had announced that, they were going to mandate vaccinations. And if you're not getting vaccinated, if you're a federal worker, that they're going to put in mitigation measures, right? So I was like, did you get vaccinated? And he was like, no. And I saw him 2 weeks ago, and I was like, well, okay, have they put in mitigating measures in your offices, right? Because he's like, the military has military cops. I don't want to go too into detail because I'm not trying to get him in any trouble or anything. But basically, he was just like, oh, no, nothing's changed in my office. There's no social distancing. There's no regular testing. There's no anything. And I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. And he, because of his job, works with, the FBI. He works with other agencies, things like that. They, collaborate when they're, trying to be cops and such. And he was saying, no, nothing's changed at all. And I was like, well, that's weird because you're all, federal workers. And so I just started to kind of, look for news to see if any reporters had been following up on, okay, well, that was, this summer in June, July. It's already September, August when I saw him. And he's telling me, well, no, basically from his experience, right, he hasn't seen any changes as far as agencies he's collaborating with in the state he's in or in D.C. And so
I mean,
that's what I was just wanting to talk about.
Well, I get what you're saying.
Make sure
I mean, I think that there's no doubt that the press was far more skeptical of the Trump administration than the Biden administration. A, I think that's true. B, I will also say that we still didn't hear one fraction of what happened during the Trump years. There's a limited amount of of press, frankly, in this country. And I would think that, like, you know, that a certain percentage of federal offices, particularly when it comes to law enforcement, are not following federal guidelines for mitigating COVID. You know, that doesn't come as a shock to me. And I wouldn't imagine. Reporting. Well, let me just finish. Yeah. I wouldn't imagine that there's some newsrooms going like, we got to get on this story. But at the same time, like you just said yourself, the New York Times came out with a report a week after that drone strike, and it was the New York Times. They weren't just like reporting a governmental or some other. They did the work on that. So there is, it seems to me, at least some holding to account. And I don't know. I think it's out there. I think, you know, I don't think the press is as inclined to question, particularly sort of like the Beltway press is inclined to question Biden's administration in the same way it is the Trump. But I can tell you, like, you know, Sharon Lerner over at The Intercept has like a 3 or 4 part series on what's going on with the EPA. And, you know, it bleeds into the Biden years, too. I mean, you know, these organizations are institutions that have a certain amount of momentum in and of themselves and sort of function almost like independent from the administration that they're under, you know, once the trajectory is set. So in many respects, we're still seeing sort of like the Trump administration. It takes a while until, you know, changes are made that make it like a product of the Biden administration versus the Trump administration. Frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if those offices there are still working under those auspices, to be honest with you, particularly when you're talking about, you know, law enforcement on a federal level. Appreciate the phone call.
All right. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to run for 1 second.
All right.
Take over.
I'm going to read some IMs while Sam is gone. Sam's tummy ache. Very apt. Joe Manchin doesn't care if mine workers were given new jobs when the mine closes. He cares about the $500K a year he makes as the owner of the mine. That's true. It's unbelievable how... sorry, I had a Zoom notification. Unbelievable how that's still allowed. Nancy Pelosi also, you know, questionable ethics with her stock portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, it's criminal that these people are benefiting from that, like, base speculation in a world that they control.
Yeah, that there isn't a specific law barring that kind of conduct. Tom from Yakuba. Sam. Yakubia. Sam, well, this is for Sam, so I won't actually read that yet. Kevin from Philadelphia. Emma, how are my birds looking after yesterday? Falcons kind of stink, but Hertz looked real good, and the D actually showed up. I was surprised. That was one of the bets I didn't hit on yesterday. I thought that the Falcons would look a lot better. And, you know, I think Hertz has to prove himself with accuracy, but he looked better than I thought. Have you heard? I'm becoming more certain that we have a legitimate unification tactic in pursuit of higher vaccination rates for there to be a concerted effort on both the left and right to place pressure on the Biden administration to waive the vaccine patents. The most consistent message from the vaccine hesitant is the money-making paradigm between healthcare and our government in America. You know, I don't necessarily know that would move the needle on vaccination rates, but I'm in favor of it just in terms of opening up vaccine availability for people in poorer countries that haven't been able to get it, as we're okaying booster shots in this country.
I would love to see evidence that there is appetite on the right anywhere to join with the left in advocating that we remove IP protections for vaccines. I just don't think that exists.
Yeah. I mean, they're the same folks who are talking about how big pharma is responsible for injecting you with an experimental vaccine, but they want to take horse dewormer.
No, but I mean,
so
like,
that it's not coherent anti-pharma.
Like, it's possible, like people like Brett Weinstein and all these people, like, there's a reason they're talking about that bullshit instead of the stuff that's important, like getting rid of these IP protections.
Right.
It's all to take the place of the real things we should be talking about. They're not interested in actually like regulating pharma or getting rid of IP protections.
Right. Don't burn this book. My significant other, I think, worked for AmeriCorps for a year in Little Rock back in 2015. As she is wont to tell me, it is possible to stick with veganism as a part of the working class. All right, well, yeah, Sam's back, but I
mean, possible. I think I wouldn't have.
It's possible is surely a threshold.
Yeah, possible versus like very difficult.
Right.
Given the way we've set up, the agriculture and food in this country.
Hello.
I came up in the course of having an argument with John Benjamin over the weekend, as I do whenever we get together. All we do is just meet to argue about something. It's usually fairly random.
A meet argue. It's like not a meet cute.
It's a meet up.
Oh.
I just, apropos of absolutely nothing, I became convinced over the weekend that Joe Rogan inflated his taking of ivermectin just simply because of a report that I saw that his mentions in social media are way down ever since he went behind the paywall. And
I saw Howard Stern weigh in on that too.
And
which is
Howard Stern came up because
yeah.
I was talking about, like, this happened to Howard Stern when he went behind the paywall. And the one thing that broke through through that was the ivermectin, controversy. But when you go behind a paywall, your numbers go down. They must have known this was going to happen because it happened with Howard Stern. Obviously, there was no social media at the time when Howard Stern, but his mentions in the media just plummeted when you're not offered for free. And I'm not 100% sure what that dynamic is about. People can have different sort of ideas, but I'm quite convinced that it was he may have gotten ivermectin, but he didn't have to go so hard at it. And I think they wanted a little more controversy.
It's really stupid though.
Of nothing, but.
Because because he had Brett on, I believe, again for an emergency podcast, but they don't actually address the types of. I think so. Maybe I'm misremembering that. Maybe it was an earlier time, but
don't get it wrong. It'll get you canceled again.
Come at me. But the idea that they haven't addressed the whole stuff about the idea that they were touting prophylaxis just earlier this summer, but now it's all the horse. People say it's horse, but actually it has these limited
as being prophylactic.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what really particularly bugs me about this shit too is the arrogance of people that they think that they are able to find these specific cures by combing through medical journals or documents and cherry picking what they want, and they think that they can glean something that the rest of the scientific community hasn't gleaned. It's gross to me, and of course it's just these I mean, Rogan type white guys who think that they have the special cure.
It's also really has the same sort of faulty logic as the Barack Obama wasn't forged his live certificate of birth, but couldn't forge the birth certificate. Barack Obama could have this whole conspiracy of all the people in Hawaii who are involved with the government. They'll vouch for him, but they're lying. But there's no way for the president of the United States, who has that type of control, to forge a birth certificate. This is the same thing with the ivermectin thing. It's okay, you think the ivermectin is being sort of suppressed because it is a miracle prophylactic cure. For
what reason, I'm not exactly sure, but
But that's the thing. Is why did you have a cocktail of a bunch of other things? Why didn't you just take ivermectin? Why did you have to have this backup of this other stuff?
Right. You could have just taken a little bit of ivermectin. You should have been fine.
Yeah, or a lot of ivermectin, and you should have been fine. Like what?
You're a healthy guy, Joe.
Why don't you think the monoclonal stuff that you also got and every other treatment you got in the hospital, why is that not part of the conspiracy? Like, they're making a bunch of cash on that too.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Somehow it's more natural because it comes from the antibodies, except, you know, all of these drugs and technology eventually start from somewhere that's natural and like work within your body's natural processes, which is the same thing as the monoclonal antibodies thing, but there's no real logic with it.
So we had on the program today Samuel Moyn, who talked about his book Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War, and one of the, maybe it's too strong of a word, but villains in his story is Barack Obama, who took those elements of our forever war and our war on terror that were most egregious and isolated them and pulled them out as if they weren't part of the whole, which was egregious, which is our war on terror.
It's just the way we did it, not what we're doing.
Exactly. And one of the things that he failed to do, Barack Obama, was to hold those people who oversaw a torture regime, who lied this country into a war, failed to hold them to account, failed to hold George Bush to account and his administration. And that is why 20 years after 9/11, the guy who completely ignored the threat that was presented to him in the months and weeks running up to 9/11, the guy who used 9/11 as a means in which to launch an illegal invasion and occupation, the guy who used 9/11 to create an infrastructure which allowed for the rampant spying on Muslims, the spying on the general population, that allowed for a torture regime to grow and had an OLC that tried to justify it. To get up 20 years later and be, hailed as a voice of reason. Here is George W. Bush from Saturday, the 20th anniversary of 9/11.
As a nation, our adjustments have been profound. Many Americans struggled to understand why an enemy would hate us with such zeal. The security measures incorporated into our lives.
Pause it for 1 second. Yeah. Pause it for 1 second. Just like that, even this guy is able to do this 20 years later. How much hatred does an enemy have to have that it would kill 3,000 innocent civilians? Well, I don't know. Figure out what the metric is for that. Now time it times, 10,000, and you'll get a sense of how many innocent civilians we caused to die in Iraq. Or, divide it by what you need to divide to get the 10 civilians we just killed the other day.
I also love the nebulous use of enemy. Right. Who is the enemy, George W. Bush?
How much must they hate us? They don't just hate us enough to invade our country like we do, or to attempt to remake the country or occupy it for 20 years. They hate us. They hate us more than that.
Yeah.
Here it goes. Let's continue on.
As a nation, our adjustments have been profound. Many Americans struggled to understand why an enemy would hate us with such zeal. The security measures incorporated into our lives are both sources of comfort and reminders of our vulnerability. And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism.
Pause it.
In their disregard
Is there
for
really
human...
little cultural overlap?
Cultural overlap.
I mean...
But that's also telling, right? It's because of Muslim culture and Middle Eastern culture. That's part of what the root of their hatred towards us. What could we have done, right? He says, what could we have done to make an enemy hate us? So, I don't know. Well, our entire involvement in the region, slaughter of countless civilians in the region, the torture regime that then followed. I mean, I don't know.
I do think that he is correct insofar as there is not necessarily a lot of cultural overlap between people, let's say, living in Afghanistan and, let's say, people who are living in Alabama.
But who
or
cares?
In Oklahoma. Well, there is some ideological overlap.
Philosophical, yeah.
And some philosophical overlap, which he may not touch on. A lot of that has to do with actually a fundamentalist worldview, a theocratic worldview that many of those people share. They don't necessarily worship the same God, at least in the way that God dresses and the music that God listens to. But when you strip that stuff down, it starts looking a little bit like the similar God. Same motivation.
Right, except in the United States, we're all fat and happy and wealthy and not being bombed on the regular by a world superpower that is then trying to conflate like right-wing extremism here with reactionary extremism in a country that's trying to find a way to fight against that global hegemony in any possible, like, I'm not sympathizing with it, but it makes more sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, arguably. Let's let George Bush make his point. Cool.
But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit. And it is our continuing duty to confront them.
Yeah, that foul spirit is, dude. You remember all the prayers that those people made when they came in on January 6th?
It's the same people that he wanted to appeal to by, making gay marriage at the forefront of his 2004 presidential
that's a similar sensibility.
He's still speaking out of both sides of his mouth here, because there's a way you can hear where he talks about people who respect life and people who respect national symbols, that he's reprimanding the left for like taking down statues and being against abortion.
I don't know if that's where he's going for that. I don't think so. I think he's trying to sort of soft pedal his January 6th stuff. But let me just remind him, this was his attorney general.
No other kings, let the mighty eagle soar.
Only God, no other king.
This country's far too young to die. She's still got a lot of...
This is John Ashcroft.
You have that on the soundboard?
Yes. That's John Ashcroft, the Attorney General under George W. Bush.
Favorite videos
was
of all
Bush
time.
trying to say that he cared about life there?
I don't know.
Putting himself in the other category?
Bottom line is, George Bush, he shouldn't be able to be taken seriously at this point, and it was a failure. Barack Obama's failure that he is. So
we're looking forward. We're not looking backward. We're looking forward to getting some candy to my wife.
Remember I want to turn the page back to after that cop funeral in Dallas, where the Obamas and the Bushes were both on the stage, and George was like seemingly drunk and dancing.
Yeah.
That's what I want to turn the page back to.
Jetpack, engage. That was for long-time listeners. Denver Dave just asked for that.
Was Rudy drunk at the...
Speaking of 9/11 luminaries showing up wasted. Now, to be fair...
we don't know if he's wasted. But...
We don't know. We're not like a walking breathalyzer from afar. It's just a little goofy way to go to 9/11. This is Rudy Giuliani basically made his name and millions off of 9/11. One of his he looks back on that day fondly as a way in which he basically just made a ton of cash.
And then
that changed the trajectory of his life.
Ran for president, failed, that kind of thing.
Now, credit where credit's due. Giuliani showed up at some 9/11 event. Donald Trump showed up at, he did color commentary for a fight in Vegas.
Yeah.
And also did a speech for the Reverend Moon in favor of the Reverend Moon, paid gig. But here is Rudy Giuliani telling everybody what's freaking going on around 9/11.
She said, you did a wonderful job.
Oh, pause it for 1 second. I'm sorry. This is not. We should be clear. This is not from the Comedy Cellar. This is Rudy Giuliani, and he is at a 9/11 event, and he is recounting on how he was hailed by the Queen. This is at a memorial dinner at Cipriani's, and he is talking about how the Queen has doing a good job.
There's stuff going on.
Teeth are falling out.
Just in case anybody doesn't know who I'm talking about, I'm going to do her voice.
She said, you did a wonderful job on September 11, and therefore I'm making you an honorary knight, commander of the Royal something or other. I turned down a knighthood because if you took a knighthood, you had to lose your citizenship. I know Prince Andrew is very questionable now. I never went out with him. Ever. Never had a drink with him. Never was with a woman or a young girl with him. Ever. One time, I met him in my office, and one time when we had the party. Right, Bernie? You were there.
Oh, is Bernie Carrick out of prison? Oh, yeah. Bernie Carrick's out of prison, right? And he's been out of prison for a while. That was, incidentally, Bernie Carrick was his police chief. And the guy that he proposed to, I think it was George W. Bush, be head of Homeland Security. Until they found out we can't. He's actually going to be arrested and go to jail, not be chief of Homeland Security. Now, Donald Trump pardoned him, so I guess it's unfair of me now. He's gone the straight and narrow. But there it is. You remember when we had Andrew in there? Remember Bernie?
Why was his denial so we only had we were only in the room once, right? Not these other times, not these other very specific locations and meetups.
Yeah, it's an odd joke to make the same day that I think Michael Wolff was reporting that Steve Bannon was coaching Jeffrey Epstein for a CBS interview.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's also kind of a weird place to joke about it.
I want to also remind people
9/11 memorial
that there was extensive reporting that Rudy Giuliani did not listen to the advice that he received from his personnel as to where to place the disaster command center for New York City. It was widely reported that all the advice he had prior to 2001 was to place that in Brooklyn. However, it was placed at the World Trade Tower 7 building. And at the very least, it was reported by the late Wayne Barrett of the Village Voice that Giuliani used that command center as a place to maintain an affair he was having. I can't remember if it was with the woman he was cheating on his first wife with, or the woman that he was cheating on who ultimately became his second wife and was cheating on with her with. Look, I'm not moralizing. However, when you say we should have the command center should be in New York because I might need a place to, I might need a love shack. And it ends up being completely inoperable on 9/11. So there was no way for the police to communicate with the fire department. That's what that command center was supposed to do.
So when Rudy was going up there all the time to just check on the technology, he wasn't like...
He wasn't alone.
He wasn't tuning it up?
He wasn't alone. But understand, there's every reason to believe that a lot of firefighters died because of that decision to place that command center in Manhattan, and it ended up being right next to the World Trade Center. Like literally that building was, I believe, detonated, I think, if I remember correctly. In part, I think because there was so much diesel fuel in the thing. And I think they were afraid that was going to be a problem. And then, of course, also, we should just, since we're talking about love shacks, one of the apartments that was donated near the pit, near the pile, rather, for first responders to go and rest, was also used by Bernie Kerik and Rudy Giuliani to maintain affairs. So, good guys. Good guys. There really is, in my mind, nothing that can befall those guys. There's nothing so bad that they wouldn't have it coming if I believed in any type of like karma or something like that. It's hard to believe in something like karma and still see them able to walk around and talk and enjoy life in any fashion whatsoever. Really reprehensible. This update. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, let's do this. So, Governor DeSantis managed, apparently, there is a court that is now upholding his ban on mask mandates in Florida schools.
Yes.
And apparently the federal government is trying to figure out a way of which to deal with that so that kids going to the schools have some measure of protection.
Why can't they use the DOE thing that they're doing in Utah and other places about like discriminating against
Title IX, I think it is. Yeah, or the American Disability Act, I think it is, that they're using in
I just don't know why they can't use that in Florida. It seems interesting that like the 5 states they announced initially, Florida wasn't included.
Florida wasn't because it was because his ban on mandates was enjoined. And so because it
was in the court system,
it was in the court system
in Texas.
Exactly.
Okay.
And in fact, Politico reported that the federal education authorities on Friday, when that judge ruled, opened an investigation into Florida's attempt to block mask mandates in local schools. The U.S. Department of Education Civil Rights Office is probing Florida over a contentious state rule that requires all schools to grant parents the ability to opt their children out of wearing masks. And it is concerned that this will, in fact, I think, run afoul of federal law that everyone, including students who are disabled, receive an education. And if you have a comorbidity or you can't get vaccinated or whatever it is, and you can't go into that school because nobody's wearing masks and there's no mitigation practices. So that is happening. Here is Governor DeSantis, though, apparently at a press conference in Gainesville with vax-skeptical municipal employees, and a guy named Darius Friend doesn't want to get vaccinated. He will retire as a result, but won't receive his benefits and pension.
What a martyr.
Yeah, well, it's because of what the vaccine does to your RNA, your mRNA. Listen to this.
The vaccine changes your RNA, so for me, that's a problem. So I'm here with you folks We don't want to have the vaccine. It's about our freedom and liberty. It's not about the vaccine.
Now, that clip, the way that that's clipped is a little suspicious to me, so we should make sure that that's legit. But it doesn't change your RNA. The vaccine does not change your RNA.
That's a kind of old anti-vax trope that I've heard knocking around about it changing your DNA.
Your DNA.
Well,
this one is
vaccines changing your DNA.
Because it's an mRNA, it provides essentially a code, sort of almost like a roadmap, and then it dissolves, essentially. I mean, supposedly. I guess you shed it, is what they're convinced of. And this is one of the things that people have, I think, a legitimate gripe about. It's supposed to increase your the reception you get with your phone.
And
that doesn't last.
Really?
No. I get dropouts now after, my vaccine is wearing off, so I get dropouts
Been
on
around
my
6
phone.
months, yeah.
Yep.
No more 5G for you.
And look at this. Look at what else wears off. This is really, look at this.
Nothing.
This is a paperclip. Look at this. Drops right down now.
I'm still able to read minds, but I might need a booster shot to maintain that.
That would actually be an awesome party trick. Here is, Tucker Carlson went on the Rubin Report. Of course he did. It's all part of their circle jerk.
Kind of seems like a downgrade for him.
No, you got to spread the love. This is a rapprochement between Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck. I think that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Got to expand the circle jerk, as it were.
Maybe he'll go on Jimmy Dore's show and he can endorse him for president.
There is no doubt in my mind that he will end up on Jimmy Dore's show. I will bet. I mark this day, September 13th. I don't know when it's going to happen, but there is no doubt in my mind that Tucker Carlson will be on the Jimmy Dore show.
And that is the criteria for being a progressive presidential candidate.
There you go. Here is Tucker Carlson with an interesting revelation on the Rubin Report.
Foreign policy establishment, bipartisan, made for 20 years. Now, the real problem is some guy in Alabama who's got unauthorized views. It's like, maybe you should stop attacking these people because they are the weakest people in our society, and you're doing it in order to defend, like, the shittiest people in our society, but also the richest and the most powerful. You're the Praetorian Guard for the most powerful people. Like, how can you live with yourself? I mean that. That is so immoral.
So what do you think the answer to that question is? How do they, when you have to cover some idiotic thing that Stelter said or Cuomo, just these clown people, when you have to cover it, right? Or Don Lemon, as you call him, like how do you think they live with themselves at this point when they just lie again and again, and we have the internet to expose the lies? If this isn't 20 years ago when you were on CNN, and we couldn't expose things, we can expose it now, and they still do it.
Pause it, incidentally, 20 years ago, and go back a little bit for me, Bradley. So when we restart, incidentally, 20 years ago, when he was on CNN, he was lying about the Iraq War, incidentally. And even more grotesque, he didn't even care. He just was doing it because that was his job. He didn't care at all.
He was calling people semi-literate primitive monkeys.
Yeah.
Some things never change, right?
But
lying because it's his job.
But let's continue here. And of course, this is, we should say, the guy who's talking about the liars on CNN, and I have no brief for CNN. I don't care about them at all. Is on Glenn Beck's network. Glenn Beck. But continue.
Like, how do you think they live with themselves at this point when they just lie again and again, and we have the internet to expose the lies? If this isn't 20 years ago when you were on CNN, and we couldn't expose things, we can expose it now, and they still do it.
Well, I guess I would ask myself, like, I lie. If I'm really cornered or something, I lie. I really try not to. I try never to lie on TV. I just don't, I don't like lying. I certainly do it, out of weakness or whatever. But to systematically
pause it for 1 second. Listen to this. I want you to like really absorb this and take your time. We're going to go back so that people can really appreciate this. He is admitting that he lies on television. He tries not to, and he only does it when he's confronted with probably something else that he's lied about, right? Like, when is he cornered into a situation on television? Probably only when he has said stuff that has been untrue in the past. So I lie to cover up lies that I've told, but I try not to. And the amazing thing about this clip that I find absolutely fascinating, he is saying this, and it will, this is a moral affirmation of him, that he's reluctant to lie on television to his people, and then has the ability to somehow see inside the minds of the other people that he is not, who are on TV, and they lie in a way that's much worse than I do.
Well, I admit it.
Exactly. And that's why I'm getting moral character, exactly. And I'm, of course, I'm admitting it on the Blaze network.
Well, he kind of admitted it to, or you could see him backtrack a little bit, because he tried to say, he tried to make it like, oh, I'll do it in social situations and not on TV, after starting with I lie and saying I try not to do it on TV or whatever, right?
Right.
Like, okay, we're not talking about a little white lie to say, oh, I really like your dress. We're talking about your performance as a right-wing, like, fascist type who has enormous influence, where, I don't know why.
When I lied to those 3 million people that night about something that was at least substantial enough to be on the news, I try not to. And so I'd like a little credit for that, please.
Well, that's also, just quickly though, that's also a window into how some of these right-wingers sleep at night, right? The rest of the media lies. So I lie, but to achieve the end that I want.
And I try not to.
Well, I don't even know if that's true.
Credit.
He's lying there again.
Continue.
And again, and we have the internet to expose the lies. If this isn't 20 years ago when you were on CNN, and we couldn't expose things, we can expose it now, and they still do it.
Well, I guess I would ask myself, like, I lie. If I'm really cornered or something, I lie. I really try not to. I try never to lie on TV. I just don't, I don't like lying. I certainly do it, out of weakness or whatever. But to systematically lie
and then, of
like
course,
that,
I never mention it afterwards,
without asking yourself, like, why am I doing this? So if these people ask themselves, why am I doing this? You say, well, because I want to protect the system, because I really believe in the system. Okay, who's running the system? You're lying to defend Jeff Bezos? Like, you're treating Bill Gates like some sort of moral leader? Like, are you kidding? Like, how dare you do that? How dare you use your power to protect and guard the powerful,
Rupert Murdoch,
even as you put your boot on the neck of the weakest people? Some Catholic school kid from Kentucky? It's like a parody. Are you kidding? He's a child. And you're using your power to crush him, to wreck his life. Like, that shocks me. And I have to say, there have been many times in the 25 years I've been in TV where I think, are we using this, like, very substantial power that we have to put pictures on the screen to hurt weak people? And I have done that inadvertently over the years because I got carried away. But I really try not to. And everyone who works on our show is very aware of, like, the most basic rule, which is don't piss down. Don't attack people beneath you. If you're going to, take a punch, make sure it's upward. Someone who's richer, stronger, more powerful, in charge of more things than you are.
Or black or non-white.
Oh, my God.
Like, that's just like a life rule.
Refugees.
Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Afghan refugees.
Right. Afghan refugees, Mexican immigrants who are making this place dirty. And the amazing thing is, like, this guy wants credit for, like, I have really, just keep going. Maine journalist targeted by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson attacks non-binary CDC worker for being a left-wing activist. This is just like in the past, 12 months. We can find more and more of these, believe me. Believe me. Well, what about the kids? What about that kid from Covington? I mean, how many times have we played clips on this show where people are coming up and yelling at kids for wearing masks, or people outside, who are trying to advise school boards about mask wearing get attacked by people who are saying you're involved in child abuse, like quoting Tucker Carlson. Are you kidding me? And this guy, at least is honest enough to admit that he does it, but it's okay because I try not to. I got news for you, folks. I do this 3 hours a day. I haven't been doing it for 25 years. I've only been doing it for 50. And to the extent that we have provided misinformation about things, we correct it.
Yeah.
There's no situation that I can recall that I consciously lied because I was being cornered.
Ooh, glad I got away with that lie.
Exactly. Or that we would look for someone who was, that we got carried away and took out somebody who is weaker than us or something. But this is him bragging and taking the moral high ground.
Well, because he had. So go on, Matt.
I was just gonna say, like, a good follow-up would be like, what were these lies, and why did you say them, and what is the truth?
Yeah, and
Ruben didn't do that.
Where was the correction on your TV show for because you have a lot of power, as you say, and a lot of responsibility.
But you get a window, as I said earlier, into
how they justify
the
it.
number one priority is furthering the restoration of this white right-wing America. And if I have to kind of scapegoat somebody, or if I have to tell a lie in order to achieve that end, then that is how I need to operate. And everybody in the media operates the same way I do. So I'm just doing it in service of my agenda, and also to make a shit ton of money on my television program while I talk about elites. So him trying not to is paramount there. And notice too who elicits his sympathy as somebody who is
really great,
who is weak or not worthy of being attacked by the media. It's always white people. It's always people who fit a certain mold, and it's not.
It really is impressive that for a guy who is championing the weakest and least powerful in society, that he's never been able to find a black person or an immigrant or a refugee who's in that situation.
Well, sometimes
it's just
if they fit his
school
agenda,
kid.
Yeah, Catholic school kid.
All right, folks. I'm sorry, I didn't realize what time it was. It's 2:40 already. We got to get going. We don't have any time for any more phone calls. Apologies. Bling bling. That's my. I'm sorry. Happy Eagles fan. So how about them Giants, Emma? Hurts is way better than Jones, by the way. Fly Eagles. Aaron Rodgers looked terrific yet.
I underestimated just. Yeah, Brady's the GOAT. We get it. All right, move on.
Train boy. I'm jealous you got to spend so much time on a train, Emma. Eggs are vegan if you're pro-choice. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Caller asked about where the Republican Party goes from refusing vaccination and letting their base get sick. The base will never hold them accountable. Yep, I agree with that. Les, sound like white people whining. Wyoming grin. Wyoming Ryan. Every question Joe Manchin shouldn't be followed by what's going on with your sister. Indeed. No, your daughter, I think it is. Left-handed stranger, left is best. Fletch Nasty, hey, I'm our crew coming to you live from the eye of Tropical Orm Nicholas. We would appreciate some well wishes. Good luck, folks. I heard there's going to be 11 inches of rain or something like that.
Wait, when?
This is in Texas.
Oh.
If someone needs assistance, please contact Corpus Christi Mutual Aid or DSA. I'm sure to be happy to lend our assistance. Left is best. Stay safe out there. Good luck, folks. George Campy thought Liquid IV was going to be a hello tushy. Cosmo Possum Manch's talking point back in West Virginia won't be any more specific than I help keep big government overreach from telling you how to live your life. Got this money for these public projects and jobs. Robert C. Bird's model, indeed. Singular Phenomena having, let's see, yesterday I attended a massive protest in Amsterdam, Netherlands, obviously while wearing my MR Left is Best shirt. We were protesting the ruling party's neoliberal housing policies and gentrification. It's impossible to buy unless you already own hundreds of thousands of euros. Waiting times of social housing are massive. The regular rents are impossibly high. I know the situation in the U.S. is probably worse, but we're increasingly moving towards those type of practices. So great to see so many people turn out to protest. That's great. Rampaging Toaster, what happens does YouTube say against have against saying Sebe Day? They have a weird policy about it. About the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond, I grew up in Richmond and was taught in school that Lee was an honorable man who fought for his home state of Virginia because fighting for slavery, if it's for your home state, is honorable, apparently. Sam's tummy ache. Oh, you read that already, right? Mm-hmm. Colin from Nebraska. Who will win the NFC West?
Ooh, I think the Niners.
Critique baseball theory for low-income vegetarians, vegans. Remember the food stamp diet challenge and parallel attempts. Josh from Tucson. Sandy should hang out with us on Friday night's art stream on the Majority Discord. Chris from Taiwan. Manchin and Cinema catch all the flack, but I want to hear someone ask President Biden why he apparently can't whip only 2 recalcitrant votes in his own party. I think that's a fair question if this fails, right? Like,
yeah, it's Biden's failure, not Manchin's, in my opinion.
No, I think ultimately it will be. But right now, I'm happy to assist. And if it fails, it's ultimately Biden's fault. Sam's sexy leg. Sam, do you think we should maybe look at directing all our forces towards impacting 1 or 2 issues at once? I see we're spreading our attention thin by trying to fight for dozens of issues. And there is no one sustained campaign to achieve a goal on 1 or 2 non-negotiable issues. Well, to my mind right now, the non-negotiable should be vote for reconciliation. Between the 101 and the 5, end of days cults often get stronger into their theories after they're disproven. That's true. That's true. We thought it was going to be the 14th, but the reason why it isn't is because of this, and then they tighten up. DJ Cold Case. People in the Discord would love for Sandy to join us on Arts and Crafts nights on Fridays. There you go. All right, 2 more. IM's New Wrangler. So, Sam, take a break just to use Hello Tushy for recreational process. But Emma can't get a break to eat some cashews? All right, then 2 more after that. Max in the BK. Hey, Sam, this may be a dumb question, but how is it possible Trump needs to do these appearances for money? His debts? I don't think it's just about the money.
He loves the attention.
I think it's to also, like, how will I get as much attention possible? Not by going to a 9/11 event, because nobody will report on that, by doing something that goes against the flow. And the final I am of the day. So in other words, yes, Sam is correct. Sam's hulking masculinity. I would also like to point out that 20 years ago, we did have the internet. Yes, that's right. There was, in fact, an internet in 2000. But Dave Rubin does not know that. Matt, Bradley, Emma, welcome back. Great job today. See you guys tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want. But I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.